The night my son stood up at the housewarming party and thanked everyone in that room except me, I was standing close enough to touch his shoulder. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I held my glass of white wine and I smiled at the woman across from me, my son's mother-in-law, Beverly, who had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable before she looked away. That moment cost me something I still haven't fully named, but it also clarified everything. Let me back up. My name is not important, but if you need something to call me, my son calls me Mom when he remembers I exist, and my colleagues at the clinic used to call me Dr. Harwood before I sold my practice. I'm 63 years old. I live in Oakville, Ontario, in the house where I raised my son mostly by myself after his father left when the boy was 9. I am not wealthy in a way that shows. I drive a sensible Subaru. I buy groceries at No Frills when the sales are good. I wear the same winter coat I bought 7 years ago because it still keeps out the wind off the lake. What people don't see is what I built over 30 years. Quietly, without fanfare, in the same way I did most things. My son's name is Callum. He is 36 years old and he is, I believe, a genuinely good person who somehow failed to notice when he stopped acting like one. He met his wife, Petra, at a conference in Toronto 4 years ago. She works in marketing. She is sharp and confident and I wanted to like her, and for a while I did. Her parents, Beverly and Stuart, own a chain of car dealerships across southern Ontario. They are the kind of people who use the word investment the way other people use the word nice. Everything is an investment. The neighborhood is an investment. The kitchen renovation is an investment. Their daughter's marriage to my son was, I came to understand, also an investment of a kind. The first year was fine. Callum and Petra lived in a rented apartment in Mississauga and came for Sunday dinners when they could. Petra called me by my first name, which I preferred. Beverly referred to me when she spoke of me at all as Callum's mum, with a warmth that was technically present but strangely hollow, like a card from someone who doesn't know you well enough to mean it. When Callum called me in October 2 years ago to tell me they were thinking about buying a house, I was sitting at my kitchen table going through the quarterly statements from the investment accounts my husband had left behind, not in cruelty but in guilt. He had done well in commercial real estate after we separated. He died of a heart attack at 58, and he left Callum a meaningful inheritance, and left me a letter I've read exactly once, and will not read again. I hadn't touched my own accounts in years. I lived on my pension from the practice and the rental income from a small property I'd kept in Burlington. I hadn't told Callum about any of it. Not because I was hiding something, but because the money felt like a boundary I'd built around myself after the divorce. Mine, not a gift, not a safety net for anyone else. Mine. When Callum told me they were looking at houses in East Hamilton, a neighborhood that was changing fast and pricing people out just as fast, I'd asked what their budget was. He was vague. They had savings, he said. Petra's parents were going to help. They were looking at places around $800,000. I did some math that night. I called my financial advisor in the morning. 2 weeks later, without telling Callum, I transferred $230,000 into a separate account and arranged, through my lawyer, to guarantee a portion of their mortgage as a silent co-signer. Callum and Petra would qualify for the house they wanted. The approval would come through Petra's parents' financial advisor, who handled the paperwork. My contribution would sit in the structure of the deal, invisible but load-bearing, the way a foundation wall is invisible once the house is built. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I told myself Callum didn't need to know because knowing would complicate things. He would feel obligated. Petra would feel undermined. Stuart and Beverly would feel... I didn't finish that thought. I just told myself that what mattered was that my son got the house. What I didn't let myself think about clearly enough was this. I was teaching everyone around me that I didn't exist. They moved in on a Friday in March. I sent a card and a set of good kitchen knives, the kind that last 20 years if you treat them properly. I offered to help with the move, but Petra said her parents had hired movers and there was no need. I understood. I stayed home. I repotted a plant and watched the evening news and didn't let myself feel what I was feeling. The housewarming party was 6 weeks later, on a Saturday in May. The house was lovely. Stuart and Beverly had helped Petra furnish it. I could see their taste everywhere, the clean lines, the neutral palette, the large format art prints that cost more than they looked. I brought a bottle of Ontario Pinot Noir that I knew was good and handed it to Callum at the door. He hugged me and said I looked well. There were maybe 40 people there. Petra's family filled one side of the room. My side was me, and my sister Margot, who had driven up from Guelph specifically because she knew I needed someone there. Margot squeezed my hand when we arrived. She knows me. Midway through the evening, Stuart clinked his glass. He gave a toast. He talked about Callum and Petra's incredible work ethic and their bright future. He talked about the neighbourhood and the smart decision they'd made. He thanked Beverly for her vision in helping them get here. There was warm, genuine laughter. Then Callum stood up. He thanked Petra first, of course, and that was right. He thanked her parents, Stuart for the financial backbone that made all of this possible, and Beverly for her eye and her taste, and everything she brought to making this a home. He thanked his friends by name. He thanked the neighbours who had come to welcome them. He didn't say my name. He didn't look at me. He said at the end, and thank you to everyone who showed up tonight, it means the world to us. And that was as close as I came. Margot didn't say anything. She put her hand on my back very gently and kept it there. I smiled. I kept smiling. I talked to people I didn't know about a neighbourhood I'd researched in detail because I wanted my son to be happy in it. I ate the canapes. I said the food was lovely because it was. I left at 9:30, before the evening wound down, and I hugged Callum at the door and he said, "Thanks for coming, Mum. It was so good to have you here." He meant it. That was the part that stayed with me on the drive home. He meant it the way you mean it when he thanked the neighbour for watching your mail. Fond, brief, unexamined. I cried in the car, but only for about 4 minutes. Then I stopped and I drove the rest of the way home along the QEW in the dark, and I thought very clearly. The thing about being invisible is that it gives you an unobstructed view. I saw things over the following months that I had been too hopeful to see clearly before. I saw the way Petra redirected Callum's opinions back toward her parents' preferences. Not aggressively, not with obvious manipulation, but with the quiet, practiced ease of someone who had decided what shape their life would take and was simply building it. I saw the way Stuart spoke to my son, warmly but with a subtle authority, as though Callum were a promising junior employee rather than a man with his own judgment. I saw the way Beverly referred to family events, holidays, future plans, hypothetical grandchildren, in ways that placed her family at the centre and left a polite but definite gap where I might have stood. And I saw the way Callum moved inside all of this without noticing the shape of it. He was happy. He was settled. He had a beautiful house and a capable wife and a set of in-laws who showed up with purpose and confidence, and things got done when they were around. His own mother was a nice woman who sent good knives and came to things when invited. I called him in September, just to talk, which we did less frequently than either of us would have admitted. I asked about the house, about work, about a camping trip he'd mentioned wanting to take. At the end, I said carefully that I hadn't heard much about how the mortgage had settled, whether everything had gone smoothly. He said yes, fine, Petra's parents' guy had handled everything. It had been seamless. I said that was good. I didn't say anything else, but something shifted in me that evening. I had been waiting, I realized, for him to find out. I had assumed that at some point the details of the financing would surface, that his own lawyer or mortgage broker would mention my name, that a document would cross his desk, that someone would say something. I had assumed that the truth has a way of making itself known. But the truth had been buried carefully, and no one involved had any reason to dig. I talked to my lawyer the following week, not to do anything yet, just to understand what my position was. She was straightforward with me, as she had always been. As a guarantor on a portion of the mortgage, I had rights that the rest of the arrangement had made invisible. I had signed documents. My financial contribution existed in the same legal reality as Stuart's, whether or not anyone at that dinner party had thought to mention it. "What do you want to do?" she asked me. "Nothing yet," I said. "I want to understand what I have." Christmas that year was at Stuart and Beverly's house in Burlington, as it had been the year before. I was invited, as I had been the year before. I sat at the long dining room table and passed the roasted potatoes and answered Beverly's questions about my plans for the new year with a pleasantness that cost me less than it once had, because I had stopped expecting the afternoon to feel like family. In February, I learned something from my sister, who had heard it from Callum's oldest friend, who had heard it from Callum directly. He and Petra were thinking about selling the house within 2 years and reinvesting in a property development project that Stuart was involved in, something in the Niagara region, a resort development, high risk, potentially high return, the kind of thing that makes sense if someone else is absorbing the downside. My lawyer called it a material change in the asset situation. I called it a clarifying moment. I didn't call him to object. I didn't write an email. I did one thing. I sent a formal letter through my lawyer to the mortgage servicer, noting my position as guarantor and formally requesting notification of any refinancing, sale, or material change to the property for which I held guarantor standing. It was not aggressive. It was not punitive. It was simply a letter that said, "I exist." The call came from Callum 3 days later. He didn't start with the usual warmth. He said, "Mum, I just got off the phone with our mortgage broker, and there seems to be some confusion about your involvement in the house." I said, "There's no confusion." A silence. "What does that mean?" I told him calmly, the way I would explain anything, starting from the beginning, the October call, the math I did, the money I moved, the lawyer, the guarantor arrangement, the $230,000 that had made the difference between the financing they needed and what Petra's parents could offer on their own. I told him it had been documented properly and had existed quietly for 2 years. I didn't say why you thanked everyone in that room except me. I didn't need to. I just told him the facts. He was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally said. I had thought about how to answer this question for months. I said, "Because I wanted you to have the house, and because I think I made a mistake in believing that the right way to love someone was to disappear." Another silence. Mum, I'm not angry," I said. And I wasn't. Not anymore. "But I do need you to know that I am here. I have always been here. And I would like, at some point, for that to be something you can see." I heard him exhale. I heard something shift in that breath. Something young and confused and, I hoped, beginning to wake up. He came to Oakville the following weekend. He came alone. Petra knew he was coming. I didn't ask if she approved. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had done the math 2 years earlier, and he drank the tea I made him, and he said, "I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "I should have? I don't know. I should have paid more attention." "Yes," I said, "you should have." Not gently, not unkindly, but clearly. He asked about the resort development, about what I was planning to do. I told him I wasn't planning to block anything, but I was planning to be acknowledged. I was planning to be consulted. I was planning to exist in my son's life as a person who had given something real, not as a woman who showed up for canapes and left before the evening wound down. He nodded slowly. He looked tired and a little ashamed. And also, I thought, relieved, the way people look when something true has finally been said out loud. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. About his father a little. About the years after the separation when it had been the two of us in that house, him small and me figuring it out. About what I had built and why I'd kept it so close to myself for so long. About what he had learned to overlook and why. I told him about my own mistake. I said it plainly. I had believed that loving quietly from a distance without requiring recognition was a kind of dignity. I had been wrong. It wasn't dignity. It was erasure. And I had participated in my own. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. I believed him. That matters, I think. The resort project didn't move forward. Stuart's numbers didn't work out, and the development group dissolved quietly in the spring. The house remains as it was. I remain as a guarantor, but that is almost beside the point now. What change is harder to measure in documents? Callum calls on Sundays. Not every Sunday, but most. He asks about my week, actually waits for the answer. He came with Petri in April to help me sort through some things in the basement, old files from the practice, boxes that had been sitting since the early years. Petra was quieter than I expected, more careful with me. Whether that was her own doing or Callum's, I don't know. It was enough. Beverly and Stuart still refer to the house as a testament to their family's forward planning. I have stopped expecting them to revise that story. It is theirs to keep. I have my own. I am 63 years old and I built something real across 3 decades, and I nearly let it go completely unwitnessed because I confused self-sufficiency with invisibility. The two are not the same thing. One is strength. The other is just a very slow way of disappearing. I don't intend to disappear. Not from my son's life. Not from the story of what we built together. Not from any room I walk into with something real to offer. The Subaru still runs fine. The coat still keeps out the wind. And on the table in my kitchen, next to the teapot, there's a photo Callum texted me last month. The two of us at some forgettable birthday dinner 3 years ago, laughing at something neither of us can remember. He texted it with no caption, just the photo. That was enough. That was more than enough. I'd been thinking about that drive home from Callum's housewarming. The QEW at night, the orange glow of the highway lights, 4 minutes of crying and then nothing, just the road and my own very clear thoughts. What I didn't understand then, but understand now, is that the moment I stopped crying wasn't toughness. It was something quieter than that. It was the beginning of finally being honest with myself. I had spent 30 years building something real, and I had also spent 30 years teaching the people around me not to look for me. Those two things cannot coexist forever. Eventually, the weight of one collapses the other. What happened between Callum and me didn't happen because he is a bad person or because Petra's family is villainous. It happened because I made a choice, repeatedly, to love in a way that required nothing of anyone, not acknowledgement, not awareness, not even basic attention. I told myself that was generosity. It wasn't. It was a kind of dishonesty dressed up as grace. Callum couldn't see me clearly because I had never actually stood still long enough to be seen. The invisible foundation holds the house. Yes, but if the house doesn't know the foundation exists, the first time someone needs to make a decision about the structure, they'll get it wrong. And they did. The thing I keep coming back to is this: knowing what's right isn't enough on its own. I knew what I'd contributed. I knew my son was drifting inside a set of influences that didn't include me. I knew, when Stuart gave that toast and Callum followed it without saying my name, exactly what had happened and what it meant. Knowing wasn't the problem. The problem was that for 2 years I sat with that knowledge and didn't use it. I waited for the truth to surface on its own, as though truth has some obligation to make itself convenient. It doesn't. That's not how any of this works. What finally changed things wasn't sending the lawyer's letter, though that mattered practically. What changed things was the decision that preceded it, the decision to stop participating in my own erasure. That took something I'd been quietly conserving for years without spending, the willingness to be uncomfortable in my own son's life, to take up space, to say plainly, I am here and what I did was real and you need to know it. That is not a small thing for a woman of my generation. We were not raised to make claims. We were raised to manage and endure and make things smooth. And there is something valuable in that. I don't dismiss it entirely, but smoothness has a cost, and I paid it for a long time before I realized the bill had gotten too large. Callum sat at my kitchen table and said he was sorry, and I believed him. I still believe him, not because he said the right thing, but because I watched him sit with the discomfort of being wrong about his own mother. And he didn't deflect. He stayed. That took something from him too. What I want, if anyone is sitting with something similar, a contribution that's been overlooked, a presence that's been made invisible, a love that's been accepted without being recognized, is to say that waiting for someone to notice is not a plan. Clarity is. Speaking plainly is. The short-term discomfort of being seen is far less expensive than the long-term cost of being forgotten by the people who should know you best. The Subaru still runs fine. Callum calls on Sundays. That photo sits on my kitchen table. It's enough, but it only became enough because I finally decided I was worth the trouble of being known.